Hey friends, it is a joy to be with you for another edition of Before Conference Conversations. My name is Jonathan Page. I'm the Director of Connectional Ministries for Innovation and Creativity. And today we are talking about the Independent Commissions Legislative Committee with my friend Kim Johnson. Kim, good to see you.
Hello.
Just as a reminder, these are podcasts that we're doing in advance of the postponed 2020 General Conference that's happening in Charlotte, North Carolina, April 23rd through May 3rd of 2024. And so Kim's with us to talk about independent commissions. Kim, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of where you come into this work from. Where do you go to church? What's your role in the annual conference?
Sure. I'm Kim Johnson. I work for the Northern Virginia District. I am the Director of Communications for NOVA. I also am the Director of Communications and Youth Ministry at Haymarket Church, where my husband is the pastor, Brian Johnson. So we're just kind of all over the place.
Rocking and rolling.
Yeah, big fun.
No shortage of things to do. And you've added General Conference to
Woohoo!
that. You're one of our wonderful lay delegates, first-time delegate to General Conference. So tell folks a little bit about how you got interested in being a delegate to General Conference. What has you called to this work?
I have two little boys, and I want there to be a church for them in a way that there was a church for me when I was growing up. I want the church to look more like I think the church should look, and I think Jesus wants the church to look.
That's awesome. And General Conference is the way to make that happen.
Well, sure.
At least in part.
So says someone, right?
So says somebody in a book called The Book of Discipline.
Right.
And so in the role of General Conference work, you serve on a legislative committee. We've already been over independent commissions. Was there anything particularly that called you to that work that said like, hey, this is like I was born to legislate on independent commissions?
No, I was actually elected as the third alternate. And so based on some shuffling that's happened, I inherited the committee of someone who had chosen it. So
you were not called to this work at all?
Well, what's interesting is that we do have communications, a little bit of communications in the midst of a lot of other things. So that was fun to see because I do like that.
Well, and it's an important reminder to folks about the process, right? That our delegation is assigned to legislative committee, but it's by order of election. So we get to kind of like pick and choose. But when you're coming in as an alternate, you're stepping into a space that was already occupied. So so you're getting to learn all sorts of fun things. So Kim, if you had to define independent commission for folks, it sounds kind of ambiguous a little bit on the surface. Is there a way of defining that for people?
It's a lot of reports, lots and lots of reports from the Archives in History and African American Methodists and UMCOM and COSRO and UMW/UWF and UMM. It's just a lot of kind of those entities as far as reports, and then the legislation kind of goes along with that.
And so it kind of relates to I hear some of the boards and agencies of the church that fall into that. And so if you're thinking about the legislation that's before this legislative committee, are there do you sense there are like some buckets or themes that seem to be kind of where stuff is falling for the most part? We
have about 30 petitions that have disciplinary ramifications, but a lot of them are eliminating redundancy and a lot of different ways to get at reducing some of the boards put through by different folks. Some by the boards, some by random individuals, et cetera, et cetera. So
just to follow up on that, when we say reducing the number of boards, is that like
reducing the number of people on the board?
That's what I was just going to ask.
Sorry.
Are we like, that's news to me?
No. Okay. Making adjustments based on a lot of the kind of trends that have happened. So.
Sure. And I'm assuming that most of those adjustments in numbers are probably reductions in the number of people on boards.
Yep. And is it 7? Is it 8? Is it 11? Right. It's a lot of that. Just kind of those little pieces. And
so that's one of the buckets of legislation. Are there any other kind of sort of prevailing themes that are present?
We have a lot of resolutions, about women and girls and justice. We've got kind of a lot of those pieces, a whole litany of them. I could read you my very long list, but so I think that is where some of the passion and some of the groups that I've been talking about is because most, again, of our disciplinary legislation is more maintenance and not hot topic kind of things.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we've, in some of these conversations we've talked already, but for anybody who might be tuning in for the first time, especially to hang out with Kim Johnson, it might be important to distinguish that there's a difference between a disciplinary petition, a non-disciplinary petition, and a resolution, right? And so being able to find those resolutions, that's often a good place where, like, hey, we want to be able to have a conversation about this, to offer some aims without saying, like, this is the way it must be forever and ever for all time, amen. So that's really fascinating. Do you find, as you've kind of reviewed all of that, do the places where you're finding resolutions seem to make a lot of sense as resolutions versus disciplinary petitions? Is there stuff that...
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of them seem no-brainers, right?
Yeah,
like, it's, nothing that I'm like, oh, just, affirming women, affirming girls, affirming, being against sexism and gender violence and all those things that I feel like, personally, I'm like, yes, we should be against those things.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah, and in the communications world, because again, that's my jam, there's just helping to kind of change the language in the Book of Discipline to move toward kind of more technology, right? We're less print, we're more digital, kind of using words like that indicate where we are in 2024, as opposed to, whenever it was kind of initially.
I'm trying to remember if this is in your legislative committee. I think it is. Isn't there a petition about, like, removing the toll-free phone number?
Yes, that's in ours. Yes, apparently the United Methodist Men are required to include toll-free telephone numbers in their work somehow. Wow. So we're hopefully going to take away that requirement for them.
What was I'm trying to remember when I was a teenager, there was something, it was like 1-800-COLLECT or something like that. There was some toll-free number that they're probably petitioning against. Like, keep it in.
So yes.
Well, that might be a good segue to ask if is there any particular legislation that you've read, like, oh, wow, that really stands out as something noteworthy, or anything that's like, oh, we got to be careful about this, or anything like that?
So there are a couple of petitions to merge some of the agencies, kind of like what we were laughing about earlier, but there are some petitions to put things inside of other things that did not come from those boards themselves. And so that just kind of in tune to that to see what is what. And many of those boards do have petitions to reduce some of their own things. So instead of just merging with someone else, let's take a different stab at it. And so some of that we've kind of talked about in preparation.
I wonder for you if it's I've found something. I guess I'll use me language and then ask you if you found this too. It's interesting when you see those things that are proposed by folks outside of those boards and agencies. There's a very small space for rationale and so, like, in fact, it's so truncated that, like, you'll see somebody starts to write a sentence and then just cuts off, like, maybe even half a word, not even half a sentence. Do you find, like, when folks are suggesting that, has the rationale been clear about the sort of why behind that, or is it?
I think ultimately it's financial, right? I mean, everyone is looking at what does it look like, budget and all those things. So I think that that's the desire behind it. I'm not sure that that's the way to go about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's good that there's that sense of stewardship. I know, like, we're in the annual conference office, we're always looking to serve the local church. You serve the local church in both the district capacity and in the local church. And it's always sort of, how can we get back to making sure that we're making the most of the dollars that folks give? Yeah, exactly. That's smart. So in a lot of these podcasts, we've had conversation about sort of these three priorities of regionalization, the revision of the social principles, and removal of harmful language. Anything coming up for you about any of those three in independent commissions?
No, ours, again, are not directly tied to those. I have archives in my zone, and so like, how are we going to record some of these things as they happen? So that's in mine, but most of it, again, is just kind of basic, as my 13-year-old would say.
13-year-old basic is sometimes different than everybody else basic.
Right.
That's fun. So Kim, kind of shifting ideas, I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about kind of what your preparation process has been like. Is that we'll just leave it at that. What's your preparation been like?
Yes. So my husband is pastor, and so we have lunch together on Mondays. And so for the last many, many months, we've been reading legislation together. Ooh. It's very fun. So he's kind of my brainstorming partner. I don't serve with anyone else from our delegation on our committee. I'm a solo on independent commissions. And so it's been nice to have a brainstorming partner. Sure. And then I've been meeting with some folks who we've been reading and looking through legislation together. And, that's kind of.
Do you have I know some folks have like a legislative committee, like pre-group that's been working together. Is that kind of what you're referencing?
Yes,
with
we've
that?
been meeting together for a couple of months, which
Very
is
cool.
nice. But someone new is at every meeting we get a new friend,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
which is
yeah.
great, but then also kind of hard to, we start over almost every time,
Wow.
to meet a new
Wow.
friend, to bring them up to speed and stuff like that. So it'll be nice to all be together and actually kind of dig into the work.
Yeah, and we're recording this at the end of March, so not to put you on the spot, but do you know the full composition of your team yet, or are you still waiting to find out, like, from other parts of the world who's assigned?
Yeah, we meet again on Monday, and I hope
Okay.
that we'll have our
You'll have the whole
right.
the whole
But right
list.
now it's just been U.S. friends.
Yeah, that's similar to my experience and a lot of folks' experience, and that's important because as we're leading up to General Conference, I think one of the things that we hope is that this truly is a global gathering, global conversation, and make sure everybody's voice is heard and included, and that's the lead up. There's so many different logistical balls in the air, so to speak. So it's not always realistic to have everything just thus and so, but
well, and in my committee, it makes me laugh almost every time because many of us are inheriting. Many of us have moved up, so a good portion of us were alternates or not. Some folks have elected entirely new delegations, and so we're all jumping in. Kind of, we feel behind the 8 ball because we have not been in this specific preparation place since 2019 because it's been more recent than that.
Yeah,
so.
wow, bless you. Well, it's a big lift, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Kind of as a closing question, Kim, I'm curious. Imagine with me, it's May 3rd. Semisonics playing Closing Time in the background. We're all heading out. What's the story that you hope we're telling leaving Charlotte at the end? On May 3rd.
Yeah, I hope that it's a positive experience in a way that it feels like it hasn't been for friends and colleagues who have been in recent years. I hope that we feel like we've made forward progress. So that's kind of my hope against hope, and that we can just keep going. There's too much work to be done. There's too many people who need to know Jesus. There's too many churches that need support and help, and so I just really want us to be able to concentrate on that again in a different way. So.
For sure. And I think about how we started this podcast by thinking about your kids, right? I also have a kid slightly smaller than yours, but imagining that all of that is for the sake of not only the people who are already a part of the church or engaged in community, but for the people who are emerging and who will be. The idea that God's love is for everyone, right? And that there's never ambiguity about what that can be. Yep. There's something beautiful about that.
That's how I feel. So,
hey, go team.
Yeah.
Hey, we did a pod.
Hey, woohoo.
Look at that. So just as a reminder
can I say two more things? That
Please.
I didn't talk about?
So,
one of the things that's in our updated legislation for independent commissions is the United Methodist Women have changed their name since we were elected in 2019. That was around 2022. Maybe I might get that wrong. But and so there's a petition situation that they're not going to change their name in all of the Book of Discipline because legally they're still the United Methodist Women and they're operating as the United Women of Faith.
Is this one of those like doing business as kind of things?
Right.
Yeah.
Which was kind of a question I asked. I was like, oh gosh, is this the committee? Are we going to have to change every word in the whole Book of Discipline? But we're not because of that. So that's
really helpful.
Was an important
And
piece.
so that means we'll still continue to see United Methodist Women language in the Book of Discipline. It just, but we know what it means.
Yes.
Got it.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. So, and I thought I had one other thing I wanted to say, but it's not in my notes right here. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do an outro. If you think of it, interrupt me and we'll redo the outro.
Perfect.
And that's a win.
Oh, I remember it.
You remember? Look at that. See?
My legislation has the report. It's being voted on in another committee about the sharing full communion with the Episcopal Church.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's a big deal, too. It's a big deal to my pastor husband. He's really excited about that. But it's fascinating to me that like all of the words, the report, and all of the why is in ours. But I think
but the vote happens.
Higher ed, I think, is voting or is
interesting.
The legislation for the Book of Discipline is in higher ed.
Right.
But we have the rationale and the why.
Interesting. And then we'll vote on it as a plenary,
right.
I'm sure. And just so folks are clear, the word communion, a lot of times we use communion to mean like bread and juice kind of stuff, a table. Yeah. This is a little bit of a different kind of communion, right?
Right. Yeah. It's being able to kind of share pastoral responsibilities between denominations is a very basic way to put that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be a huge step because there's a lot of the Episcopalianism that's reflected in, in fact, we used to be called the Methodist Episcopal Church way back in the day, fun times. And so it's in many ways, it's sort of in a time where I think that's such a testimony in a lot of ways, because in a time where we talk a lot about disaffiliation, about disunity, it's sort of reclaiming a former unity that existed at one time. And there's something really beautiful about that. Not to show any bias about that legislation, of course, but yeah. Well, cool. That's a very important reminder. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing about that, Kim. And thank you all for tuning in. It is always good to be able to share information about General Conference. And if you ever want more information about what's happening in Charlotte, what we anticipate is going to be happening in Charlotte, I would encourage you to visit vaumc.org/GC2024. There you'll find all of our theme videos about General Conference, other editions of the Before Conference Conversations podcast. You'll also find an infographic that is incredibly helpful about General Conference, and it was designed by somebody in this room. And so you definitely want to check all that out. But Kim, thanks so much for taking time to meet with us today. Thank you all for tuning in. Be well, stay well, and we'll be in touch again real soon.
Bye.
Peace.